Recently, I came across the story of a truly extraordinary woman, Jane Goodall. Her life has been deeply intertwined with the dark jungles, primates, and scientific exploration. But what truly moved me wasn't just her groundbreaking scientific achievements, it was how she, as a woman, walked a path entirely her own, despite the skepticism and biases of the world. I never imagined that a single story could shake my beliefs so profoundly, making me rethink my own value and even influencing my life's direction. She wasn't someone's assistant. She was uniquely herself. Jane Goodall's journey began in 1960 in Tanzania. At the time, she was just a young woman with a passion for animals and no formal scientific degree. By conventional standards, she was only fit to be an assistant to a male scientist, never a scientist in her own right. But she refused to accept that fate. With no protective measures and no technological support, she ventured into the Congo jungle alone to closely observe chimpanzees. Day after day, she crouched on the damp ground, quietly documenting their behavior, trying to establish a connection. Over time, the chimpanzees moved from being wary of her to accepting her presence. One even approached her voluntarily, an unforgettable moment in her research career. She made a groundbreaking discovery. Chimpanzees use tools. This shattered the long-held belief that humans were the only tool-making species, challenging the very foundation of human superiority. But when she presented her findings to the scientific community, she was met with skepticism, not applause. She's just an amateur woman with no formal scientific background. She got lucky. She just happened to observe something unusual. Her research isn't rigorous enough. She's too emotionally involved. She was labeled as emotional and unprofessional, and some scientists outright dismissed her work, saying, "She's a woman. How could she possibly outperform us in primate research?" But she didn't stop. Time and again, she backed up her work with data and experiments. Over the decades, she transformed not only primatology, but also how the world perceived her. She was no longer someone's assistant. She was Jane Goodall, a woman who revolutionized our understanding of chimpanzees. What moved me most were the details of her life. One scene from her documentary has stayed with me ever since. She was sitting on a rock in the jungle, surrounded by the damp earth and the sounds of insects. In her hands was an old yellowed notebook, and she was quietly writing down her observations. Her clothes were soaked with sweat, her hair damp from the rain, and her feet covered in mud. But in her eyes there was a fire, a deep, unwavering passion. In that moment, I saw a person who truly loved what she did, who wasn't seeking validation from others or bothered by hardships. She was simply immersed in her world. Her research wasn't easy. She suffered from malaria, enduring days of high fever, too weak to even stand. She slept in a tattered tent under torrential rain, listening to wild animals roar in the distance. She faced government evictions, funding shortages, and even witnessed her beloved chimpanzees being killed by poachers. But she never gave up. I couldn't help but ask myself, if I were in her place facing such challenges, would I have persisted? Jane Goodall did, and she used her life to prove that women are not meant to be someone else's shadow. They can carve out their own place in the world, even change it. Her later years made me respect her even more. Jane Goodall could have spent her later years basking in the glory of her accomplishments, enjoying a quiet retirement, but she didn't. Now in her 90s, she still travels the world, advocating for conservation, animal rights, and education. She doesn't own a private jet, a fleet of luxury cars, or even a permanent home. She spends nearly all her time on the road, staying with volunteers or in small hotels, tirelessly speaking at events, attending meetings, and pushing for environmental policies. Her travel bag is always the same worn-out canvas bag. inside which she carries her most precious notebooks and photographs from decades of research. In an interview, a reporter asked her, "You've done so much for the world. Why not take a break?" She smiled, her eyes filled with quiet determination. Because there is still so much work to be done. There are still forests being cut down, chimpanzees being hunted, rivers being polluted. If I stop, who will speak for them? Every single day of her life, even in old age, she remains as unwavering as the young woman who first stepped into the jungle all those years ago. This story made me rethink my own life. After hearing her story, I sat there, lost in thought. She used her life to prove that women do not need to live in someone else's shadow. They can be a light of their own. And what about me? Am I willing to pursue what I truly love, like her, instead of being confined by society's expectations? That day, my mindset changed. At work, I no longer hesitate to express my opinions, fearing they'll seem too assertive. In my dreams, I no longer set limits for myself or back down because of societal expectations. In life, I have started to appreciate myself, not based on how others see me, but on how I see myself. Jane Goodall's story taught me that a truly great life is not about conforming to the world. It's about changing it, and I too will become my own person.